Well, a couple of years ago, when I first saw Switcho Radios on the VirtualFly website, I didn't know if I really needed something like this, and the price was kind of daunting. So I passed, even though I love my VirtualFly gear. I have the Ruddo, the Yoko, and the TQ6 throttle quadrant, and they're bulletproof. Some of the best stuff I've ever bought for my sim. So when the folks at VirtualFly offered me a chance to try their new and improved Switcho radios, I decided to give it a try. The latest version not only features the same hardware and the same original functionality of the Switcho radios, but with a swipe of a finger on the touchscreen, you can go to a secondary screen showing a PFD, engine instruments, fuel information, and autopilot status. Now, before we review the Switcho radios, a little bit about Switcho in general. It's a set of panels that are made by VirtualFly, and you can see the grooves in the side and enables them to be connected together. Although they can be removed from the case for panel mounting, the sturdy aluminum enclosures are designed to be fit together like Legos, using some connectors that are provided. They're inclined at an equal angle so they fit together. And here we see the engine modules, which contains two modules that can be mounted side by side or on top of one another. There's also the lights module, which contains fuel panel also with crossfeed and fuel pump switches. Notice the angle on the top side view, showing how all the modules are angled so that they slope away from the pilot for easy viewing. And the final panel in that grouping is the trims module, including gear and flaps, parking brake, elevator and rudder trim, and two multifunction switches that have changeable magnetic placards depending on aircraft type. The Ruddo's radios module is also designed to fit right in with the other units and can be attached in various configurations. The new and improved Switcho radio has two main screens. First, on the 1024 by 600 color touch screen, we have the original panel for the Switcho radio. Across the top from left to right, we have the annunciator panel, a touch HSI selector switch, and to the right, flap trim and gear indicator. On the bottom left are the active and standby frequencies for the nav comms and the transponder code in the selected transponder mode. In the centers are the DMEs, and on the bottom right, the autopilot mode and settings are displayed. Swiping down from the top of the screen will invoke this comm panel, including marker beacons. Just touch beneath that bar if you'd like to dismiss it, and it will retract back out of sight. The major improvement to Switcho radios is the new add-on software that allows the display of a second screen as you see here. Just a matter of swiping to the left, and this screen shows up and displays a full-featured PFD, including flight director and HSI. There's also a autopilot mode annunciator at the top of the screen. And as you can see, engine instruments located on the left side of the display, including fuel quantity information. The engine and systems information on the left side adjusts automatically based on the aircraft you're flying to the following 6 formats: single and twin engine piston, single and twin engine jet, and single and twin engine turboprop. Physically, the Switcho radio seems well built. It has 16 push buttons and 8 single push button encoders. The color touchscreen has good resolution, has decent side angle viewing, and looks great. The unit requires no video connection to the computer because the onboard Raspberry Pi can not only handle the interaction with the simulator, but it can also generate the video that's displayed on the touchscreen. So let's take a look at what's required to use the Switcho radios with your favorite simulator. I'm going to do a demo first here with X-Plane 12 with the Citation 10 aircraft. Before you start, you need to download and install the VF Hub software from VirtualFly. Once that's installed, all you need to do is connect the power supply and the USB to the computer and press the start button. This begins the boot up process for the Raspberry Pi that powers the Switcho radios. First, it has to boot up the operating system. and after that to load the software that runs the Switcho radio. Now, the VF Hub software is not operating at this time. So what we'll see here as it completes the boot process is the default screen with no data being displayed. So I'm going to click the VF Hub software in the taskbar and watch how the engine instruments change to the jet configuration as it loads. Now, the VF Hub software allows you to make settings for all of the VirtualFly hardware. You can see that it shows connected to the computer and enabled. So it is connected, and you can see that the VF Hub is connected to X-Plane. The setup really is very simple. Let's minimize and hide the VF Hub. And now we're in our simulator, and we have the instruments operational. We can push the power up and see the response on the gauges corresponding to the simulator. So let's say now you'd like to switch to a different aircraft. All you need to do is to select the new aircraft. We'll take a Piper Comanche, and we will start that up, and we'll watch the instruments on the screen, and they will change from a twin engine to a single engine with manifold pressure and RPM. While this makes for a pretty seamless operation, I will warn you that some advanced add-on aircraft may not be supported if they use data structures that are not the standard data structures for the data being displayed. We'll try one more aircraft swap here. Let's try switching to, let's try the King Air, and we'll watch the data switch to a twin turboprop here just in a second as it loads up, and there you go. I think you can see it's pretty easy to use. So now let's take a closer look into the hardware itself, including the innovative way that they've gotten dual encoder functionality out of single push-button encoders. At first glance, you can see that the buttons are laid out in two areas beneath the touchscreen. The left is the radio controls, with knobs for the nav and COM and the accompanying transfer switches above. And below that, you have knobs for the ADF and transponder. To the right side, you have autopilot controls, including all the standard buttons that you would expect for an autopilot. And beneath that are four encoder knobs to make inputs to the autopilot, the left three knobs offering selectable dual functions. The final control is the on-off button located in the bottom right. I have to admit I was impressed by the innovative and instinctive functionality they were able to accomplish using a single push-button encoder. Let me explain how they work. Now, these push-button rotary encoders can have three types of inputs. Obviously, they can be rotated to get one function. They can also be held in and rotated. And finally, they can be momentarily pushed in and released to obtain a third function. Let's see how this plays out on the Switcho Radios encoders. Let's first look at the Navcom encoders since they work the same way. When you momentarily push and release the encoder, it toggles the COM or the nav between nav1 and nav2 or COM1 and COM2. When you rotate the encoder, it changes the fractional or the part of the frequency to the right of the decimal point. And when you hold the knob in and rotate it, it changes the whole number or the part to the left of the decimal point. So when you think about it, this is pretty intuitive. If you look at an actual dual encoder, you see that the outer knob, or the one closest to the panel, controls the whole numbers or the integer digits, and the inner knob, or the portion furthest from the panel, controls the fractional digits. So interestingly, the muscle memory is the same. To change the whole digits, you're reaching in or pushing in towards the panel. Let's try this on the panel. First, we'll try pressing the button momentarily to swap. And you can see the standby nav1 and nav2 are switching the active. Then let's rotate the knob without pushing in, and you can see the standby nav1 frequency being changed in the fractional part. Then pushing the knob in while twisting, you can see the whole number portion being adjusted. The ADF knob is slightly different. A quick push toggles between the active and standby frequency, like the swap arrow did on the COM nav. And also like the COM nav, if you press in while rotating, you get a large change, in this case 100 per click. Well, if you don't press in, you get only a single unit per click. So let's see how that looks. You can see the standby IDF frequency is 300. If we push the button momentarily, it switches to 700. You can see we swap those back and forth. We can adjust the small numbers. You can see the tens and zeros, the 10 and 1 place digits. And by the pushing in and turning the knob, we can adjust the large numbers. The transponder knob operates slightly differently. When you momentarily press in the knob, you toggle between the digits from left to right. And by rotating the knob, you change the value of the digit. If you hold and rotate, you change the transponder's mode. Let's see how that works. A momentary press of the transponder knob causes the left digit to be selected, and it can be adjusted by twisting the knob. Pressing again toggles to the next, another press, and then twist the knob, another press, twist the knob. And you can set the transponder code. If you press again, it will deselect, and then the next press will take you across with each subsequent press. If you hold the knob in, you can see the mode of the transponder is changed as the knob is rotated while being held in. The left three knobs associated with the autopilot have slightly different function. When you push, you toggle the selected function. When you rotate, you change the value. And when you hold it in, you either sync it or invoke a different format or function. Let me explain further how each of those work. But first, let's talk about how you know which mode you've selected for use with each knob. At the bottom of the autopilot, you can see that for each of the three knobs, the values are displayed and the currently selected function of the knob is highlighted in white. Pressing the course 1, course 2 needle causes the selected course to switch from course 1 to course 2. Rotating the knob changes the selected value. Holding the knob in causes the course to set a direct to course to the station. Moving to the right to the heading gyro knob, rotating the knob will change the value for the selected mode, and pressing the knob momentarily will toggle the selection between heading and gyro. Just holding the knob in for more than 1 second will sync the heading to the current aircraft heading. Next to the right, the Baro IAS knob works pretty much the same way. A quick push selects the desired function, and the knobs make the adjustment. The difference is if you hold the knob in, Baro will set 2992 standard altimeter, and on the Mach IAS, its readout will change between indicated airspeed and Mach. Finally, the last autopilot control knob is the altitude knob, and it works as you might expect. If you rotate it, it will change by 100 feet per click. If you rotate it and hold it, 1,000 feet per click. And if you push it, it will sync to the current altitude. So rotating the knob, we get 100 feet per change. If we rotate the knob and push, we get 1,000 feet. And holding the knob in will sync to a current altitude. One thing I would like to see is a way to know which mode the autopilot knobs are in without having to switch pages back to the autopilot page. I might suggest this. Take some of the real estate at the bottom of the PFD and provide some simple prompts so that it's always obvious which function each knob has. So let's take a look at the Switcho radios in action using X-Plane 12, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and 2024. And I'll discuss some of the things I like and some of the things I dislike about the Switcho radios as we go along. Well, first of all, this unit is well constructed. quality materials, good screen, and I've had good experience for customer and technical support from VirtualFly over the years. It's also a very versatile piece of equipment with the radio stack, the primary flight display, engine instruments, autopilot. It does a lot, and it would cost a lot to replace all these with other pieces of hardware. Another great feature is the ability for this unit to attach to other Switcho units to create a panel. Although the unit ships with some feet that have rubber pads, I did notice some movement while pressing buttons. So if you plan on using the unit standalone on a desk, I would check into VirtualFly's clamping system that is available that will fit in the grooves on the case and affix it to the front of a desk or table. Another advantage I like about the Switcho Radios is that it's standalone hardware. It runs the Raspberry Pi, which produces the video needed to run the screens. So you don't need to have an extra video cable connected to carry the video like so many other pieces of hardware that use the simulator's video to display in a dumb monitor. The Switcho Radios has almost zero effect on your simulator's computer performance. I also like that it works with multiple simulators, including X-Plane 12 and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and 2024. Without touching the Switcho Radios, I was able to jump from simulator to simulator and continue flying. In a similar way, when flying within a simulator, if I made aircraft switches, the Switcho radio automatically changed the engine instrument layout and synced up with the new simulator aircraft. Another great feature of the Switcho radios is that it's so easy to set up. The VirtualFly Hub software, once installed, pretty much does everything. It's just a matter of plugging it in and starting to use it. And if you have other VirtualFly hardware, it's nice to have a single source to control all of it. And finally, I love the way they have utilized single push-button encoders to get functionality very close to an actual dual encoder. And I think this may be used by other people doing home projects with programs like Air Manager. So let's now take a look at the Switcho radio in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And I'll point out some of the things that I think could be improved with the Switcho radio. As you can see now, we're on the runway in Innsbruck, and we're using the T-tail Bonanza. As we start the takeoff roll, I'll say that the 7-inch 1024 by 600 screen is very easy to read and has good clarity, about as wide as a Boeing 737 NG screen. As we take off, one problem that I found is that using the PFD, I can't see whether the gear is up or down. So when I get the gear up and the flaps up, I need to somehow confirm that. And I have to swipe over here and look at the gear and the flaps, and then swipe back to the PFD. And you can see that it's not a good time to be doing that. So I have an idea. As I mentioned earlier, as you recall, that it would be nice to know the function of those three knobs, the autopilot knobs on the left that have multi-functions, and to put that somewhere on the PFD. I also think it would be nice to have something like this for gear and flaps on the PFD. So while I wouldn't consider that exactly a negative, it would be a nice improvement. Now, one thing that I did find that I think could be better, especially for a high-quality piece of equipment like this, was the instrument markings. The red and green markings and bands on the instruments seem rather generic and don't change from aircraft to aircraft. Also, the values that are displayed don't always agree exactly with the flight simulator. Let me give you an example. Here's the much-flown Cessna 172, an X-plane. And you can see that while the RPM is close, it's off by a small amount. You can also see that the oil pressure is peaked out at 40, while the aircraft is actually indicating in the green at 76 psi. The oil temperature is close, but again, off by a few points. Fuel flow also is slightly different. And these pictures were taken simultaneously while the simulator was running. I don't think having the numbers off by a few RPMs or a few PSI is a big deal, but I don't like that the color arcs don't agree. For example, you can see on the Switcho radios at about 2000 is where a red line on the RPM appears, but on the aircraft it's much higher. While this probably isn't important for just fun flying around in the sim, if you're trying to do training, flying around in the red arc all the time is just negative training. And just to show you that this is not just a problem with X-Plane, if you look at the stock Beechcraft Bonanza in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, you can also see the RPM in the red arc on the Switcho radios, while it's well within the green arc on the aircraft. And all the other markings don't match as well. So this is a across-the-board problem in all aircraft types. The good news is the developers at VirtualFly have told me that they have already planned for the upgrades to the engine ranges and to correct those values in the next Switcho Radios E-edition update. The engine limits for each indicator for each aircraft will be updated dynamically, and that should address the issue. My hope is that at some point they'll develop custom profiles for add-on aircraft that don't use the standard data structures. Well, from what I've said so far, it's hard to figure out why everyone wouldn't want to have the VirtualFly Switcho radios in their home sim setup. Unfortunately, there's one elephant in the room that I have to talk about, and that is pricing. Like most VirtualFly gear, this stuff isn't cheap. I realize this is a hobby, and for some people, pricing may be a deal breaker. But let's take a look at the numbers before we walk away. Well, first, the basic unit costs 895 euros, or about 921 US dollars. But then there's an upgrade for the E-edition, which is the one I've been flying here, and it has the PFD included. It's a software upgrade that you could add later. Then there was the shipping to my location in the central US, near Cincinnati, Ohio. I was charged an import duty of 145 US dollars. And when you total that all up, it's a pretty sizable amount, especially if your wife has access to the credit card bill. But seriously, if you went out and tried to reproduce the functionality of this unit with separate hardware, you could pay this amount of money just for a radio stack with the same capabilities as the Switcho radios. When you add in the PFD with engine instruments, the autopilot controls, the annunciator panel, price really isn't as bad as it first seems. Obviously, this solution isn't for everyone. It offers a lot of functionality for the price. I'd say it lies somewhere between DIY encoder panels or a touchscreen with Knobster, and on the other extreme, a complete cockpit build-out, 100% authentic, which will cost many, many times as much. But for pilots who want to do training, I think it's a pretty good solution at a price that's not completely unreasonable, especially if you're not inclined towards do-it-yourself. Now let's take a look at the Switcho radios in action with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. I'll try to give you a summary of my thoughts about the Switcho radios. Here we're flying in the TBM above the mountains in Colorado on a snow-covered day, and you can see the torque is now the top gauge on the engine instruments. The Switcho radios does a great job of keeping up with changing aircraft and even changing simulators. The hardware seemed quite solid to me, and the swiping motion to switch screens seemed to become fairly natural pretty quickly. When VirtualFly provided this unit for me to try out, I wasn't that familiar with the modularity of these Switcho units, but I gotta say, I really like the way they fasten together, and I'm thinking very seriously about buying a few more of the units to add to my cockpit. I mentioned a couple of the issues that I did have with it. One, to add more information to the PFD to monitor which knob functions are currently active, and also gear and flaps to avoid having to swipe the screen. But besides that, I was very happy with the way the software operated and the information that was provided. It was more than enough to do what I needed to do. I mentioned the problem with the ranges and color bands on the engine instruments, but my experience with VirtualFly over the years is that they can be counted on to deliver the upgrades that they promise they're going to make. In the meantime, I'd like to see them add a couple more engine instrument configuration options. A single engine jet and prop, having a power percent gauge to accommodate the popular Cirrus aircraft, both the SR series and the Vision jets. So to sum things up, do you need Switcho radios in your home cockpit? Well, that depends. If you're a Switcho user already and you're building out the cockpit, it's a no-brainer. It integrates well, and it is quality equipment. Also, if you need the functionality and you haven't already invested in other hardware for similar tasks, it also seems like a good addition and a wise investment. Of course, you also need to be able to afford it, and not everyone is in that situation, since this is a hobby for many people. But if you're involved in pilot training, or if you have a real airplane and you want to try to get as much functionality as you can for a reasonable price, then I definitely take a good look at Switcho Radio for use in your home sim. I think VirtualFly has another winner here. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you, and I thank you for staying till the end if you're still here. You know the drill. If you like my video, I'd appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and I love your comments. If you have ideas for future videos, I'd love to hear what you'd like to hear about. Thanks again. Hope to see you on my next video.